Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about appointments with PPS. During today's session, we will be exploring the following topics, which will help you to understand how to set up your own diary and appointment system according to your needs. In order to fully understand that, we'll be taking a look at setup. We'll then take a look at making and managing appointments, and lastly, we'll take a look at additional features. If you do have any questions during today's session, please feel free to post them using the chat feature, which you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen. So the first part of today's session will be looking at setting up. So we'll take a look at setting up in our lookup tables. We'll then move on to setting up the diary, and lastly we'll take a look at confirmations, reminders and follow-ups. So if we jump straight into PPS, we can start taking a look at how to do that. So the first section I mentioned is the lookup tables, and this is where we can actually set up our appointment types and add any additional charges or associate any templates, etc. to our appointments as we're creating them. So firstly, you need to click onto the Tools menu, and you'll want to select the top option here, which is Lookup Tables. Now within that window, you'll see that it's broken down into 4 tables, and the two that we'll be concentrating on today is our Appointments Diary tables, and we'll go through quite a few options within that menu. And then very slightly we'll be looking at accounts tables, so the standard charges and stock items, which enable us to add a specific charge to our appointment types. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at setting up our appointment types, and you'll see appointment type about halfway down the menu in that appointments diary table window in the bottom right hand corner. So simply highlight appointment type and click on to open, which will then open up another window, and if you're already using appointment types, you should see a list of existing appointment types there. If it is the first time that you are setting up appointment types with PPS, you may have a couple of appointment types in there as default, and of course you can use the buttons at the bottom here to add, modify or delete anything that's already existing within that list. So to set up a brand new appointment type, simply click on to add. And I'm going to use an example which is already set up to illustrate how the different fields can be used. So when you click on to add, it will bring up this window here, but of course it will be blank. And the first thing that you'll need to do is type out a description for your appointment type. So that could be an initial assessment, a follow-up assessment, or as I've gone with here, something very generic such as a treatment. Secondly, you get the option to choose from a department. So if you are working in a multidisciplinary clinic, it may be that you have departments set up, in which case you can allocate your appointment type to a particular department. And just below there, you can also allocate a specific category. So in this case, we've gone with some very similar options, but you can add any additional categories by simply typing into that box. And then when you save this appointment type, it will add that new category to that drop-down menu, and you'll be able to select from that again in future. Just below there, you've also got the option to add a reporting group. So if you take a look at the drop-down menu, you'll see you've got initial, follow-up and discharge. What that means is that if, for example, I popped this into the initial reporting group, that when I come to do my reports at the end of the month, if I want to see how many appointment types we've had that fall within that group of an initial appointment, I can use that specific criteria to identify those appointment types that are associated with that reporting group. Just to the right of that, you also have the opportunity to allocate a type, and you'll see that there are only 2 options within that menu, the first of which is appointment, and the second of which is event. So if you were to choose appointments, it would just be a single booking whenever you book this particular treatment into the diary. Or alternatively, if you do run classes, or perhaps you run sessions that are able to cater for more than one patient at a time, you can set that up as an event. So for example, that would allow you to book multiple people into one appointment slot for a yoga class. So it's just a case of what this particular treatment is going to be used for. And just below there, you also then get the opportunity to allocate a default charge to your appointment type. So that's just a case of selecting your charge from that drop-down menu when you've set that up. So depending on which order you like to set things up, I usually like to set my appointment types up first and then add my charges. You might like to add your charges and then your appointment types. That's completely up to you. We'll go over to charges in a moment so that I can show you how we would set those up and then allocate them to our appointment types. So if you haven't set those up already, you can leave that blank for the moment and revisit it once you've added your charge. Just below there, we also have the opportunity to select an appointment booking confirmation template and an appointment reminder template. Now you'll see that mine at the moment both say use default, and that's because I've selected to send the same template out to all of my clients, regardless of their appointment type. You do have the option to send out a different booking confirmation and or a different appointment reminder, dependent upon the specific appointment type that the client is actually coming to the clinic for. So we will talk about that in a little bit more detail when we actually come to setting up the booking confirmations and reminders and deciding the settings there. But just so you're aware, when I do reference that again, this is where you would choose your individual templates if you didn't want to use a default one for every appointment type. Just below there, we also then have the opportunity to allocate some settings for sending out follow-up reminders. So say, for example, after every initial assessment, if the client does not rebook, we like to send out an email 6 weeks later, just reminding them that their follow-up is due. So we can define that criteria here. So I can say that 6 weeks following this particular appointment type, we want to send out an appointment follow-up reminder. Just below there, you get to select a default appointment duration. So for example, mine's 30 minutes here. And then we can also allocate a particular custom form to this appointment type. So again, for example, if I was filling out or setting up an initial assessment, it may be that we have a series of questions that we always ask during that initial assessment that we have in the form of a custom form, in which case I can select that form from my menu here and associate that to my appointment type, which means that I'll then be prompted to fill out that form each time I book somebody in for this particular appointment type. Right at the bottom, I can also allocate a specific colour to my appointment type, and that just makes it nice and easy to see what people are coming in for if I look at the diary at a glance. And then of course we've got the button here at the bottom to mark this appointment type as active. And if I click onto more, you'll see my window also expands over to the right here, where not only can I set up for online booking right at the top, if that is a feature that you're using with us, but I can also add diary filters. So perhaps only a couple of my practitioners are able to undertake this specific treatment, in which case I can tick those practitioners that are capable of catering for this appointment type and leave those that are not unticked. And that just means that when I'm booking the appointment into the diary, if I'm booking an appointment with clinical assistant in this case, that means that this specific appointment type won't appear in that list when I'm choosing what the patient is coming in for. And we can do that same thing on the right-hand side with locations. So if this particular treatment was only available at our London locations, I can change that here and simply leave Burton and Derby unticked, as we don't perform that treatment at those locations. And once you're happy with those settings, click on to save, and that's your appointment set up. So that's nice and easy. Now I did mention setting up charges and allocating those to your appointment types. So if you haven't already set up your charge when you're creating your appointment type, you can do so by clicking onto standard charges and stock items. And again, it will give you a list of all of your existing standard charges and stock items, and it's just a case of adding or modifying or making changes to your existing ones. So it's just a case of clicking on to add and then starting to fill out the information here as required. So the minimum I'll need to do is add a description and a code, and it can be something very similar to the appointment. So if my appointment was a massage, I can just add the charge as massage. Of course, if you've got more than one massage treatment, perhaps at different durations, you might want to add massage 30, massage 40, etc. And then associating a code. You can then also allocate a charge type. So we can add this as treatment, for example. Again, this is quite important for when you are wanting to report on information. So if I'm recording my charges and I'm putting those under the charge type of treatment, I can then separate out the revenue that we've had within a particular time period from treatments compared to stock, for example. So I'd set up my description at the top here, and then I can set up my code at the bottom. And the code is just something that you create for yourself, so it's just a reference to this particular charge, and the only requirement is that it's not duplicated anywhere. So if I do have several treatments which are very similar, I just need to make sure that my codes are slightly different so that PPS can differentiate between those different charges. So once you've chosen your description, your code, and a charge type if necessary, you can then allocate a charge. So you can do that as either a net charge and then choosing a VAT code, or if you don't charge VAT, you can just add the gross cost here on the right-hand side. You can also use the other features in this section here, so you can add notes, a particular warning if necessary, and you can also filter this particular charge to a practitioner or a location. In this scenario, if it is a charge that's associated to a particular appointment type, you'll probably have already set that criteria up based on your appointment type rather than the charge anyway. And then this whole bottom section here is specifically for stock items, so you don't need to worry about that in this scenario. So if I click on to save, I'm just going to revisit that charge and just show you, now we've come back into this charge, now it's been saved, you'll notice that we now have this button here on the right hand side highlighted, which is price profiles. Now what this allows us to do is define different charges depending on different criteria. So for example, if our massage is typically £60 for our general practitioners, but perhaps we have a higher price in our London locations, or perhaps we have a higher price for our senior practitioners compared to our junior practitioners, then we can facilitate all of that information by using price profiles. So if you click onto price profiles, that will bring up this window here. And you'll see at the moment, because it's a brand new charge that I've created, there's nothing in my list, so I need to click on new to start adding a brand new price profile. So you'll see within this window here, I then get to define the criteria and the variable charge depending on that criteria. So for example, if it was that if our practitioners book this same treatment in London, it's going to be slightly more expensive. I simply need to select my location filter as London and then choose my set my cost at the bottom here, so either again net or gross, and then I simply need to save that profile. And once that's added to my list, whenever we book this particular appointment type, PPS is going to be checking for any price profiles. So if I book this particular appointment in one of our other locations, it's not going to change the £60 fee. But if I was to book this appointment in London, it's going to recognise that I have this criteria here and then adjust the fee accordingly. And you can add as many different price profiles as you need to your particular charge. So if I go on to new again, you'll see I've got those same options and I can mix and match those as well. So if it was that when the appointment is booked in London and the practitioner is Mr. Davis, it's even more expensive, again I can reflect that in my price profile here. So it's just a case of choosing the criteria at the top here, and you can also define that by invoicee as well. So if it is that a particular insurance company charges a little bit more, so perhaps Bupa charges a little extra, so we in turn have to charge the client a little bit extra, again we can define that here by simply adding that third party as our invoicee. So if we search for insurance companies and I select Bupa International, you'll see it's now going to be checking that when the appointment is in London, if Alan Davis is the practitioner and if Bupa International are the invoicee, we want to charge the client a little bit more to compensate for what we're being charged. So again, we can just click OK to add that to our list of price profiles. So it's a nice easy way of keeping your records down in your charges list, but it also allows you to cater for the different scenarios and different criteria. So once you've set up your charge, it will then appear in your list here, and to allocate that to your appointment type, it's simply a case of going back to your lookup tables, visiting appointment types again and clicking on to open, and then simply choosing the appointment type from the list that you want to allocate that charge to and click modify. And then it's just a case of choosing it from that drop down menu. So I can just find that based on the code and then click on to save to add that to my appointment. So the next bit of setup that we're going to be looking at is also contained within that bottom right hand corner appointments diary tables. Now there are a few different things that you can do to customize your PPS system in terms of managing your appointment diaries, and most of those options you'll find in that list here. So for example, right at the top we have the option to allocate equipment. So for example, if there was a piece of machinery that we have in our practice, but perhaps we only have one piece of machinery, but we have several practitioners that can be treating at any one time. If we use equipment, so by clicking on to open and clicking add and simply typing out a description of our equipment, we can then ensure that we are checking for usage conflicts. So if I've booked out my particular X-ray machine for 10:30 on a Monday morning, if anybody else tries to book an appointment using that same equipment, they're then going to get a notification that the equipment is in use at that time, in which case they can then make alternative arrangements or reschedule the appointment with the client. So it's a good way of keeping track and ensuring that you don't have any conflicts when booking appointments. Now the next option is just a little bit further down that list. We can also add treatment rooms. So again, if you are a larger practice and you have a few different rooms with a few different practitioners, you can allocate different rooms, again by clicking on to open and then simply clicking on to add your rooms to that menu. So we can give the rooms a name, as you can see in my existing list here. You can allocate a diary colour, and right at the bottom here, if you're using a patient call feature, so one of the little call boards where you can call them into a room, you can add information at the bottom here. Just below that, you also have the opportunity to add locations. So we've seen within this system, when I've been setting up my appointment types, I have several locations which my clients can choose from when booking an appointment. So to do that in your system, simply click onto locations and click open, and you'll see my existing locations. And to add a brand new one, I simply need to click on to add and enter the details. So the name of my location, I can associate a colour to that again, and then the contact details at the bottom here, so address and any contact phone numbers, email addresses, etc. Now moving down that list, we also have a few different options. Right at the bottom underneath appointment types, we also have the opportunity to add departments. So again, that's another one that we've seen whilst I've been showing you how to set up just now. So if you are a multidisciplinary clinic, you can add departments by selecting it from the menu and again clicking open and then choosing add to add the description of your department, any address details, and again you can associate a diary colour to that if you wish to do so. Now also within this list, not only can we set up locations, treatment rooms, etc., but we can also set up the features that we want to use within our diary. So for example, we have reason for non-attendance here, and if you double click onto that or click open, you'll see that this is where we can add the reasons to record when a client cancels an appointment. So if for any reason they were unable to attend, we want to be able to, rather than just delete that record, keep a record of the appointment, but mark when it was cancelled and why it was cancelled, etc. So this is where we can add those reasons, which we can then choose from a drop-down menu when we're cancelling an appointment. So you'll see we've got the normal options at the bottom here, so we can add, modify or delete anything. And if we're adding a brand new reason, if you click on to add, you'll see this window appear here. And the first thing we want to do is add a description at the top, so reason for non-attendance. Once you've done that, you can then move on to allocate, if necessary, a default charge code. So perhaps if you have a policy of billing for any late cancellations, so if they're within 24 hours of the appointment, for example, you can allocate a default charge code to this particular cancellation reason, which will then prompt you to bill the client when selecting that as you're cancelling an appointment. So very similar to when you're setting up your appointment types and associating a charge, you can do the same thing for cancellation reasons. And again, it's just a case of choosing from that drop-down menu. Just below there, you do also have the opportunity to set up a reminder which will be sent out to the client following a cancellation with this particular reason selected. So I can select the number of weeks that I wish this communication to go out after. So, sorry, it doesn't have to be weeks, it can be days or months, etc. So I can say 3 weeks following a cancellation. If the client hasn't rebooked, I want to send them a notification just to remind them that they did cancel their last appointment and give them a nudge towards rebooking. Right at the bottom, I do also have the opportunity to tick to say that I would like to reopen the appointment slot when this particular reason is selected for cancellation. But don't worry too much about selecting that here, because you do also get the option to select that when you are actually cancelling the appointment as well. So that might be more of a deciding at the time of cancellation whether that's appropriate scenario. So we'll run you through that again when we actually come to showing you how to cancel the appointments from the diary. And lastly, you can also select a diary colour again, so a highlight colour, and that's how it will appear when it's in your diary. So the last thing we're going to look at within this menu is very similar to reason for non-attendance, and it's non-availability reasons, so just below. And if we click on to open, all will become a little bit clearer. So you'll see with some of the reasons that I've got in my list here, that these particular reasons, rather than being for the patient, are for our practitioners. So this is a good way of us keeping track of when our practitioners are unavailable for appointments, why they're unavailable, and you can see some of the reasons we've got in here are holiday, for example, which also allows us to keep track of where our practitioners are, how much holiday they're taking, things like that. So again, we've got those add, modify and delete options, and if we click on to add, it's just a case of adding a description and a default duration. Again, don't worry too much about the duration at this point. If it is for lunch breaks and they're always typically 60 minutes, then it's a great opportunity to predefine that. But if it's going to be something which you're not too sure about the duration of, and it could vary, you can pop a default one in here, but you can always change it when you're actually using this particular reason. And again, I'll show you how to do that when we get to the diary. And right at the bottom, again, you can allocate a particular colour to it. So that brings us to the end of our lookup tables. So once we've actually added our appointment types and all of our settings, such as locations, departments and treatment rooms, etc., you'll then also want to make sure that your practitioners' diaries are set up, ready for you to actually book the appointments into. So you can do that by clicking onto the Tools menu and going down to Set Up Appointments Diaries about halfway down this menu. So that will bring up this window here where you can see that you can manage all of your practitioners' appointments diaries, and it will always have the current week that you're accessing this screen from so that you can work from today moving forwards. Of course, if you do want to make any changes on past dates, you can do so. It's just a case of simply selecting the week that you want to make the change from. So, for example, if I wanted to make a change to my practitioner's diary, I would simply highlight the week that I want to make a change commencing from, and then click on to modify from the bar at the bottom of the window here. So clicking on to modify then expands that particular week for me, so I can see each day from Monday to Sunday broken down into individual slots. Now it may be that I want to add availability or remove availability, and I can do either of those things by simply double clicking onto the day if I want to add availability, or if I want to make a change to an existing slot, I simply double click onto the blue space, or in this case we've got orange spaces as well. So if my practitioner here no longer wants to work the Sunday shift, to make a change to that I simply need to double click on that slot and then I can click delete. That then removes Sundays from this particular practitioner's schedule, And if I want to add any additional slots, I simply need to double click onto the day, and then I can set up my information here. So I can choose a department, I can allocate a location, I can select a room, and I can even add a description right at the bottom. So for example, morning or afternoon session. And then I simply need to type out my start time, so when I want to start my appointments from, and then the end time on the right hand side there. So we can make it a nice short session if we want to. And then a default appointment duration. Oops. We don't want to have appointments that long, so 30 minutes should be fine. And then if we click onto OK, oh, it's clashing with one of my other slots. So I can make that an afternoon session. And then click onto OK, and you'll see that's then added to my schedule. And making any changes is exactly the same process, just double clicking the existing slot and making changes as necessary. And when I click onto save, those changes will take effect on that week only. But if I do want to continue those changes or that setup going forward, I can use the repeat button at the bottom of the screen here. I then get the opportunity to repeat that setup every week, every other week, every third week, so on, for a number of weeks or up until a certain date. And the maximum number of weeks that you can repeat that for would be 99. So if you do just want that to be ongoing until it can't go any further, 99 is the maximum number of weeks you can select there. And once you've done that, if you do want those changes to be reflected in another practitioner's diary, you don't have to go back and go through that whole process again. You can just use the copy and paste functionality at the bottom here. So I can select the week that I want to copy by highlighting it and click onto copy. And then I need to highlight the week and the practitioner's diary that I want to copy that into, and then simply click paste. So now when I go into that particular practitioner's diary for that week, you'll see that Mr. James has now got the exact same setup as my other practitioner. So it's a nice, easy way to manage your diaries all in one place. And if you do use diaries by room rather than practitioner, you have the same opportunity to do that by switching to room on the right-hand side. And all of the functionality for setup and availability, etc., is exactly the same as what we've just been through. Now, the last bit of setup that we're going to look at is, again, found under the Tools menu, under Options, and under Appointments Diary Options. Now, there are a few tabs here that you might find useful when you're reading through. And what I'm not going to do is go into detail about every option on each screen. It's more about giving you an idea of where you can find these options, because many practices will have such different requirements that we don't tend to make recommendations in terms of setting up in these areas. So within this first tab, you'll see you've got general settings. So some of those options, for example, are when you mark a client as arrived, you can tick here to send a message to your practitioner. So that's a great feature to enable, because every time we mark a patient as arrived, the practitioner then gets a message on their PPS system, which is a great opportunity to prompt them if they're running over on a particular session, because they know their next patient is waiting. So there are a few different options here to have a read through, which will change some of the settings and some of the setup in terms of how your appointments diary is going to work for you. So I'm going to skip reminders for the moment because we'll come back to that shortly. So the next tab along is Diary. And this is where you can set up the default start and end time of your diary. Now, of course, we've just looked at setting up our practitioner hours and how they can vary. So perhaps sometimes we'll have only afternoon availability and sometimes only morning. This is simply a default setting to go through so that if you do need to make any additional bookings outside of those practitioner available hours, there is the scope to do so if there were any emergency appointments or you made any special allowances. And it also then allows you to record other activity. So say, for example, appointments don't start till 9, but you're all having a practice meeting 8 till 9. You then have the opportunity to book that into the diary because there's a space to do so, but not space for your appointments. Just below there, you can set your default appointment duration. Again, you can do that per diary, so it's not too important that you visit this area and do that here. But it will just set up your default diaries in future, if you don't have time to change them, to a default appointment duration of 30. Just below there, you have screen refresh rates, and this is how often PPS is checking for any changes. So if, for example, we have a receptionist making changes at the front desk and a practitioner making changes in their treatment room, every 60 seconds PPS is going to reflect those changes on each PC. Right at the bottom here, you also have the option to choose which items you'd like to include in your diary display. So, for example, you can include the location, slot durations, and on the right-hand side, you can ask the diary to show when it's the end of the session. And right at the bottom, you have the opportunity to choose how your diary columns display. So if you do have multiple practitioners and some of them work different hours or different days, you'll see right at the bottom, you get the opportunity to hide the diaries of any practitioners that are not available on a specific day. So if we had 5 practitioners and only 3 work on Mondays, we don't need to see those unavailable diaries for the other 2 practitioners. We just want to see those 3 practitioners that are available for appointment slots on that day. So the next tab along we have is appointments. Right at the top, again, you get to choose from a series of checkboxes in terms of what information you want to actually display when you're booking that appointment into the diary. So of course, this is just at a glance. You can access the full appointment details at any time by double-clicking onto any appointment. But if you just want to see these bits of information at a glance, you can choose what you're seeing from this list here. And just below there, you get some options in terms of how you'd like to view the diary in terms of colour. And you can also change the display font and the size if you're having trouble with viewing it as it is. Now, the last tab we've got here is Utilities. And this allows us to move appointments from a particular diary user to another diary user, or from one particular room to another. So, for example, if one of our practitioners was ill, we might have another practitioner willing to stand in for them, in which case we want to move all of their appointments nice and easily to the practitioner that's filling in. So we can do that by selecting which practitioner we want to move from and which practitioner we want to move them to. And then right at the bottom, we would choose the date range to which that applies. And we can be even more specific and select a specific time period as well right at the bottom there. And we can do that same thing from room to room as well. Now, the last tab in here that we have yet to visit is our Reminders tab. And this is where we would set up our criteria for our booking confirmations and appointment reminders. So when we visited appointment types right at the beginning of this session and setting up our appointment types, adding standard charges, etc., I mentioned within that setup menu that we have the opportunity to choose a booking confirmation and an appointment reminder template. And both of those within my window said use default. So this is the screen where it's pulling that information from. So if I want to send out booking confirmations, the first thing I need to do is tick the box right at the top here to enable that feature. Just below there, I then get the opportunity to choose from a drop-down menu which activity template I would like to use, so what content we're going to send out to our clients in terms of booking confirmations. So you'll see I can choose my appointment booking confirmation template, or if I again revisit that drop-down menu, the last option here is to set this as based on appointment type. So rather than one template that goes out to everybody, so everybody gets the same email, we can choose to base that on appointment types, which then gives us the opportunity to relay different information depending on what the client is actually coming into the clinic for and what they're being treated for. So once you've chose your template, you then get to choose the different methods of contact and how we actually want to process those booking confirmations. So for example here, I've got letters disabled because I don't want to send any letters out as booking confirmations. But if I move over to the right, you'll see I've got emails and SMS set up as automatic. And that's because I want PPS to send out a booking confirmation via email or SMS automatically whenever I'm booking those appointments. The alternative option, as you'll see from the drop-down menu, is to set that as prompted rather than automatic. And the only difference there is whenever we book an appointment, rather than just sending that email without confirming that with me, if I set it to prompted, when I book the appointment, I will get a little pop-up message asking if I do want to send a booking confirmation, in which case I can then either choose yes or no. So it depends on how much control you want over your appointment booking confirmations, but setting it to automatic will ensure that all of your clients get a confirmation as soon as their appointment is booked. Now, just looking below, we also have a section for appointment reminders, which is very similar, but with a few extra bits of criteria. So again, we need to tick that box at the top here to enable appointment reminders, and then we need to go through and set up the options below according to your specific needs. So the first option we have here is if the appointment is more than, and then we choose how far in the future it needs to be before we think that client will be eligible to receive a reminder. So at the moment, my settings here are saying if my client books an appointment that's more than 1 day in the future, I want them to receive an appointment reminder. And of course, you can change that, and you can change it to weeks or months, etc. It's entirely up to you. So just below there, we then get to choose when we want the reminder to actually go out. So here I am asking PPS to send the reminder out 1 day before the appointment. So that's 24 hours before my client is due to come and see me. Just below there, I have the option to decide that if the reminder falls at a weekend, I'd like to move those to a Friday. And again, if the reminder falls on a Sunday and we're open on a Saturday, we might want to move those to Saturday. Just below there, we get the option to schedule the reminder either at the start of the day, so everybody's appointment reminders go out first thing, or at the same time as the appointment, which would obviously be sending out appointment reminders throughout the day as it lines up with their particular appointment that's due the next day. Again, we need to choose the template from the drop-down menu. And lastly, we can, as above with the appointment confirmations, choose how we want that to be dealt with. So again, we can either say automatic or prompted, but it works slightly differently here depending on whether you've got PPS local or PPS hosted. So any PPS local customers, you will need to deal with your appointment reminders manually when they are due, but it's nice and easy, and it's just a case of clicking one button, which is titled Auto Process, which sends them all out for you. Now, if you are a PPS hosted user and you have one of our services called Activity Manager, if you leave this section here, so where it's asking you who is prompted to send these appointment reminders out, you'll need to leave that section to anyone and leave your how to schedule settings as automatic. Now, if you are using PPS local, feel free to change that to prompted if you want a little bit more control. So again, it will just ask you if you want to schedule that reminder, and you'll get the opportunity to say yes or no. And you can also choose to prompt a particular practitioner. So if there is somebody that you always intend to have responsible for your appointment reminders, you can specify that here by choosing that particular system user from the drop-down menu. And lastly, right at the bottom here, again, we can also use appointment follow-up reminders, in which case we choose that little tick box here to enable it. And again, we then choose who we would like to send those out for us and how we want them to be scheduled. So once we've set up our settings here in terms of how we actually want to send out our booking confirmations and our appointment reminders, etc., we need to make sure that all of our clients are actually set up to receive those correspondence in the way that we'd like to send them out. So we can do that by going to our Tools menu, visiting Options, and General System Options. And we want to jump straight to the last tab, which is Set up Client Preferences. Now within this window here, you'll see we've got the option to set different settings for our appointment booking confirmations, reminders, appointment follow-up reminders, and lastly, mail shots. So this is where we can decide how we would like PPS to try and process or communicate with our clients in those different scenarios. So we've got two options in terms of how we'd like to set that up. We've got this left-hand side here where we can set up a chain of command. or we have the right-hand side here where we can decide on one particular method of contact. So for example, right at the top, I've got for my appointment booking confirmations, I've ticked my little box here which says email, which means that for appointment booking confirmations, PPS is always going to try and send the client an email. So there may be some scenarios in which that correspondence doesn't actually reach the client. Say, for example, they don't have an email address. Perhaps we've recorded that information incorrectly, or they may have asked for us not to contact them via email, in which case this particular setting doesn't cater for those different scenarios. Now, the alternative would be to use these drop-down menus on the left-hand side to set up a chain of command to encompass all of those different variables. So, for example, with appointment reminders, we've said here that we firstly want PPS to try and send the client an email. Now, if for any reason it can't do that, so again, if the email address is incorrect, if we failed to record one, or if the client said, please don't contact me via email, PPS will then try and send a text message. So it does have another resort. It's not just going to stop there. We are trying different communication methods. Again, if for any reason we can't contact them via SMS, so wrong number, no number recorded at all, or they've asked not to receive texts, PPS will then prompt us to make a telephone call. And again, if we can't do that, we've got the final resort of sending a letter. So not only does that allow you to cater for all of your different clients' needs, but it also gives you a higher success rate in actually reaching the client with your communications. Now, if for any reason any of your clients have specified, as I mentioned, not to be contacted via email or SMS, you can set up your individual client preferences on the client details screen. So once you've set up here, if you click on to apply, you'll see this Update Now button is then highlighted. And when we click on to Update Now, it runs through all of our client details windows and makes sure that all of our clients are set up to receive correspondence in the way that we've specified here. Now, if we do want to set individual settings, so perhaps a particularly picky client has asked not to be contacted in a certain manner, then we can do that from the client details screen. So if I search for my client, you'll see in my client details window, if I skip to preferences by using the preferences tab in the top right hand corner here, I've got a very similar looking menu at the bottom, and this is where I can specify how this particular client would like to be contacted. So we can see that Mr. Smith has asked specifically to only receive communications via text message, in which case our chain of command would work perfectly. But our appointment booking confirmations, where we're only sending emails, are going to fail to reach this client. So it's worth thinking about when you're setting up your options there. And lastly, at the bottom, we have the option to mark this client as excluded from mail shots. And once you've set up those settings, if you click on to lock those preferences, if you do make changes to those default settings that we've just been looking at, and you do click Update Now, this particular client won't be included within that update, so we're not going to get any angry or disgruntled clients asking us why we've emailed when they asked for a text message. So that brings us to the end of that first section in terms of setup. So we've been through quite a lot in a lot of detail there, so we'll have a quick summary before we move on to the next section. So within this first section, we've seen how setting up appointment types and associating standard charges to appointments makes billing much easier. We've also looked at how you can filter your diary by adding locations and departments, making it ideal for businesses with multiple locations and who are multidisciplinary. We've also looked at the flexibility of the diary, which means you can mold it to suit your needs in terms of opening hours, appointment durations, and the display settings. And lastly, we've looked at the availability of a confirmation and reminder system, which helps drive business growth and reduces missed appointments. So within this next section, we'll take a look at making and managing appointments. So we'll look at booking an appointment. We'll then look at modifying an appointment, and lastly, we'll take a look at appointment status. So again, if we jump straight back into PPS, we can start looking at how to do that. So firstly, if we open up our appointments diary, if we want to start making an appointment booking, we simply need to select the slot that we want to begin with by double-clicking onto that slot within the diary. So once I click on that slot, you'll see that most of the options for my appointments are already selected, and this is based on the setup that we've done previously. So you'll see it's automatically selecting the practitioner for me based on the diary that I'm looking at, and then it's automatically assigning a department and a location based on the diary availability, which we saw had set up in the previous section. You can also allocate a room and equipment if necessary. And again, you'll see my date and my time are also automatically selected. So all I need to do now is search for my client by entering in their surname and clicking on to enter. So that'll give me a list of my existing clients, and I simply need to choose them from that menu to book their appointments. If it is a brand new client, so they're not already in your database, you can at this stage simply click on to new, which will bring up this window here, which is a shortened version of the client details screen. So it allows you to nice and quickly register a new client, and then you can take further details when they actually come into the clinic for their appointment. So here I can take just minimal details and click onto OK to start booking my appointments. So I can then choose my appointment type from the drop-down menu. And you'll remember from when we were setting up our appointment types that you have the ability to filter your particular treatments. So you'll only see in that drop-down menu the treatments that the particular practitioner that you're booking the appointment with is capable of actually undertaking. And once I've chosen my appointment type, I can then simply go ahead and click onto OK to make that booking. Or if for any reason I need to make more than one booking, perhaps the client is coming in for a series of treatments, I can use the repeat button at the bottom here to then carry that appointment over. So I can do that weekly, or I can even do it daily or monthly, etc. I can choose to do that every week, every other week, every 3 weeks. I can choose to do that on the same day. And then on the right hand side, I have the option to either do that up until a certain date or for a number of weeks. So if my client was coming in for a period of treatments which goes over 6 weeks, I can simply pop that in here, and when I click onto OK, it will make that booking going forward for me. So rather than me manually putting that in, it's a nice easy way of repeating my appointment. So when I click onto OK, you'll see my appointment is then booked, and I can see at a glance the appointment type, my client's name, and I've got my colour coding as well. So at a glance, I can see what people are booked in for and what kind of treatments we've got in that day. When my client arrives, we can use these tick boxes that you'll see in the top right hand corner of the screen to actually mark the different stages of their appointment. So the first tick box that we would use is the green one here, which will mark our client as arrived. And what that will then do is send a message to our practitioner to let them know that their appointment has arrived. So that's a great tool for if your practitioners are usually not very good at wrapping up on time or running a bit long. It will send them a message so they know to prepare for the next client. So once the client is actually being seen, you can then move on to the next tick, which is the orange one, to mark the client as being seen. Now this doesn't send a message anywhere, but what it will do is change the status here, so I can see at a glance which client is in treatment right now. So I don't need to worry about Mr. Smith turning up late or that he's lingering around anywhere in the waiting room. I know he's being seen at the moment. Now the next stage is marking our appointment as complete. And we can do that by using the purple tick box, so the next one in the series, which then brings up this window here. So right at the top, we have the opportunity to then bill our client, and you'll see the different billing options at the bottom here. We also have the opportunity to book another appointment. So if, for example, Mr. Smith needed to come back in 6 weeks, we can specify the time period here. And when we click on to book another appointment, it simply jumps us forward 6 weeks in the diary, where we can then find an available slot. Right at the bottom, we also have the opportunity to schedule a follow-up reminder if we want to prompt Mr. Smith to rebook if he's not doing so at the time of completing his appointment. And when you click onto OK, you'll see because that appointment is complete, it's now marked as purple. Now, the last tick box that we've got here is to mark our client or the appointment as DNA, which stands for did not attend. So if anybody's cancelling their appointment, we would use this red tick. So if I select this appointment on Wednesday here, and then click on my red tick box, you'll see it brings up this window here. So I've got any notes from my appointments, which I can add my own notes to. And then right at the bottom, I have the option here to choose my cancellation reason from that drop-down menu. So depending on my reason, I'll then have the option to either choose to tick or untick to reopen the appointment slot. And I'll show you which both scenario or how both scenarios would appear in the diary. So if I choose to leave that unticked and click onto OK, you'll see that my appointment is now being cancelled because it's in red, so I know at a glance that that client will not be attending. But it's still in the diary, so I still have a record of that cancellation. Now alternatively, if I double click onto that appointment again and choose to tick to reopen the appointment slot and choose OK, you'll see that my appointment is now moved to the side. So rather than leaving that record filling up that particular slot, if the client calls in good time and would like to cancel, say, up to a week in advance, it may be that that gives us enough time to fill that slot with another client. So moving that to the side still gives us a record of the cancellation, but we can also reuse that appointment slot. So using those tick boxes to mark different statuses really allows you to have a good handle on your diary and manage your appointments from start to finish. If for any reason you did need to modify an appointment, you can do so by double-clicking on the appointment and choosing Modify, so it's a second option down. When you're in that appointment screen, then you get all of the same options that you had when you were booking it initially. So I can change my appointment type, I can change my location, my rooms, etc. But it may be that it's the time and the date that you actually want to move. So we can do that by clicking onto modifying the appointments. Or if we do simply just want to move the time and the date, you can also drag your appointment from one slot to another in the diary. So that's a nice easy way of moving the appointment if you simply want to change the time and the date. So that brings us to the end of that section. So we'll have a quick recap on that one before we move on to the last part of today's webinar. So within this section, we've seen how you can, how a simplified booking system means that you can book new clients quickly and efficiently, as well as existing clients into your appointment diary. We've looked at how appointments can be flagged in different stages, which means that others are aware of the appointment status. And lastly, we've looked at how appointments can easily be modified if you need to adjust times, dates, and/or other details. So in this last section, we'll be going through additional features, including classes and events. We'll also take a look at using the holding list, adding notes to the diary, some print options, and any additional features. So again, if we jump straight back into the diary, you'll notice that at the top of the screen, we've got lots of different options that we can utilize here when we're in the appointments diary. One of which is events. So I did mention events earlier when we were setting up our appointment types, and events give us the opportunity to book more than one person into a particular appointment slot. So it's very similar to booking an appointment. To start that event and scheduling that into your diary, you simply need to select this slot and then click onto event. From there, it's very similar to an appointment, so you can pop in your event name. So if it is a class, pop the name of your class in, and then you can choose your event type from the drop-down menu. So that drop-down menu is populated in the same way that your appointment types menu is populated. So provided you've added those in your appointment types list, you'll see those options in your drop-down menu here. Again, it's automatically allocating your diary user, your location and department, and it's automatically allocating your date and your start time. And of course, you can change the duration here if it's going to be a bit longer than the default of 30 minutes. On the right-hand side, you have the opportunity to set a maximum and a minimum number of attendees. And when you start booking people in, you'll see a number of people that are currently attending. And if this class is a regular occurrence, again, you've got the opportunity to use that repeat feature in the bottom left-hand corner. And if I click on to repeat, you'll see it's exactly the same options that we saw with our appointment. And the only difference is it's just going to repeat the event. So once you've added your event, you can start adding clients to that list. So again, we would just search for them in the normal way that you would when adding them to an appointment, by popping in their surname and then selecting the client, and then simply click Add to List. So you'll see Miss Katie Smith's now on my list of attendees, and I can simply go through that process to add my other clients. So again, I just search for my surname, select the attendee from the list, and add them to the list. And when I click onto OK, you'll see that when I view my event in the diary, I can see an overview of my attendees at a glance as well. So it's a nice easy way of keeping track of who is due to attend that class. So another feature that we have on that top bar here is holding list. And this is basically just like a waiting list. So if anybody is waiting for a particular slot, or we just happen to be quite busy, we can add that client to our holding list to then enable us to notify them when an appointment slot does become available. So if we click onto holding, you'll see it brings up this window here, and I can see a list of any clients that are currently waiting. And I've got my options at the bottom of the screen here to add any new clients or modify or delete anybody that I no longer want to have on my holding list. So if I go to add a new client, you'll see it brings up this window here where I can add my client at the top by again searching for their name. But if it's the last client that I've been dealing with, I can use this little head button here to pull the details through. So just below there, I then get the opportunity to specify my criteria. So I can choose what the client is holding for, so perhaps a morning or an afternoon session. If they're waiting for a particular diary user, if they need to be seen by a specific department, if they need to go to a specific location, and lastly, if they are waiting for a specific appointment type. And once you've set those details, you can also then decide whether this client's appointment is urgent, whether they're just waiting for next available, or if they're really happy to take any time. And lastly, we can also set an expiration date. So perhaps Miss Dorothy Smith has an appointment with us in 6 weeks' time, but she'd really like to come earlier if possible. We can set an expiration date for just before that next appointment that she's already booked, which means that if we don't get to bring her in earlier than that, if we have no cancellations, then she will just automatically be removed from our holding list because she will already have been seen with her booked appointment at that time. So once you've added somebody to the list, obviously they'll be in this screen here, so you can revisit it at any time if you want to check on that. But you'll also see a notification in the top right-hand corner of the diary here, so you will be notified that there are people waiting. And if we cancel an appointment, we will also be notified that there are people holding that are eligible to fill that slot. Now another feature is blocking out time. So again, right at the beginning, when we saw those setup options, we saw non-availability reasons for the clients and also non-availability reasons for our practitioners. And we can block out those times when they're not available by choosing that block feature here. So again, if I click on my slot in the diary, just like when I'm making an appointment, and click onto block, it then brings up this window here where I get the opportunity to specify some additional criteria. So it's automatically picking my department and my location, etc. And it's picking up the date and the time. So this is where I can change my duration if necessary. And I can choose from my drop-down menu of my non-availability reasons. So it may be that Mr. James has lunch at 12 o'clock. In which case I can select that from my drop-down menu. And if that's happening every day, I can simply use the repeat button to repeat that throughout Mr. James's diary. Now another feature that you'll see at the top here is adding a note. So again, it's just a case of selecting a particular slot on the diary if we need to add a particular note. So if I choose the first slot on Wednesday, and click onto note, it gives me the opportunity simply to write a note. So it's nice and self-explanatory. So if I put, for example, Mr. James might be late, and then pop that onto the diary, you'll see that when we're coming to book, we'll be notified that there's something we need to read here. So I can hover over that note, and then I can perhaps look at other practitioners' diaries to see if they're available and book the patient in with them before Mr. James, as it is likely that he could be late on Wednesday. So another feature on that top bar here that is also very useful is the search option. So we get the opportunity to search for an existing client appointment, and we can search for a free appointment slot, or we can see a diary overview for Mr. James. So probably the most used feature and probably the most useful is search for a free appointment slot. So rather than scrolling back and forth through the diary and flicking between our different practitioners, we can use this window here to specify exactly what we're looking for. So we can say whether we're looking for a particular day only, so perhaps our client only has Fridays free. We can specify a specific time period as well, so it could be just Friday afternoons. And then we can also specify a date range. So perhaps our client wants to come in within the next couple of weeks. We can specify a minimum duration, so if we know the appointment is at least 60 minutes. We can specify a diary user, a particular slot description, so again morning or afternoon, and a particular location. And when we've added all of that criteria, if we click onto OK, you'll see it will then give us a list of appointments which are available that match that criteria. So to make that appointment, you simply need to choose the suitable appointment date and time from the menu and click on to make this appointment, which will simply jump you to that point in the diary and bring up the booking screen to start making that booking for you. Now the last couple of things that we'll go through is printing. So again, you'll find that on that menu right at the top there. And if we click onto print, you'll see that the first option we get here, so there's two tabs, is diary prints. So what this will allow you to do is print out a diary schedule for one or all of your practitioners. So you'll see you've got a few options to choose from in terms of what you actually want to include, so what you're actually printing. You can choose your date range at the bottom here and how you want that to display when you're printing. And to check how that will appear, you can use the preview button, which will show you how that will look when it's printed off. Now the other option here is to flick onto the second tab, which is appointment schedule, which then allows you to view appointments in terms of your clients rather than your practitioners. So for example here, for my client Miss Katie Smith, I can print off a schedule for her of all her future appointments so she knows when she's due to come in and see us. We've got the same options below for any past appointments, or we can include all appointments or any between a specific date. We can then print those straight out, or we can pop them over to her via letter or email. So it's quite a useful feature for any of your specifically forgetful patients to give them a schedule for any future appointments. And the last couple of features that we'll go through are these little buttons in the bottom left-hand corner of your diary, which you may not have noticed before. The first one is this little head button here. So if I click onto that, you'll notice that my appointments now no longer contain details of my clients' names. So if we do have an open reception area, and if for any reason our reception desk is not manned at all times, we can click that button to hide our client names and know that nobody peering around to the screen will be able to see any personal data. And you can click that button again to revert to those options when you come back to your screen. Now the other options here are these two buttons which look a little bit like rulers, and if we are managing a diary with multiple practitioners, it's a good tool to switch between two different diary views. So for example, if I choose to click onto the one on the left hand side, you'll see it's now showing me all of my diary users for one particular day. If I click onto the little ruler button on the right hand side, it will switch me back to viewing just one of my practitioners for the whole week. So it's a nice easy way of switching between two different views that helps you manage your appointments diary in different ways. So that brings us to the end of our additional features. So again, we'll have a quick summary before we wrap up for today. So within this last section, we've looked at how an event system means that you can book multiple clients in for one session, rather than creating individual appointments, which is great for classes. We've also looked at the use of a holding list that prompts you to book on availability and assures that you don't miss out on business opportunities. We've looked at how you can block out slots stating the reason for your non-availability, which means that there'll be no chance of appointments being booked at those times, and you can even use this system to keep track of staff holidays. So that's using that block feature to record lunch breaks, practice meetings, trainings, etc. And lastly, we've looked at how you can print diary lists for all or single practitioners with the information you require and even appointment schedules for your clients. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you all for participating. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about appointments that you didn't know before. If you do have any additional questions following on from today's session, then of course our support team are always on hand to point you in the right direction. And we have a whole host of help guides available from our website as well, which is ppssupport.com. And don't worry if you didn't manage to take a lot of notes during today's session, because following today's webinar, each of you will be receiving an email asking for a little bit of feedback, and it will also contain a document with some detailed course notes for you. So again, thanks all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and bye for now.